citizens of the universe and God's angels. Welcome to the WGPS show with your host, Tyson Keon Jackson. And as always, we will be discussing democracy, slavery, black history, and of course, governmental psychological strategies. And now, your host, Tyson Keon Jackson.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the WGPS show. I am your host, Tyson Keon Jackson. And now let's just delve right into democracy. We have a huge election coming up in 2024, and we're going to break down right now democracy and how important democracy is, not only to the voters, but to the politicians. There is direct democracy. We broke that down in the last show. The forms of democracy: direct democracy, indirect democracy, electoral democracy, prophylactic democracy. That's when the 22nd Amendment was formed, and everybody wanted us no more longer to vote for individuals who we wanted in office, but you can only vote for an individual 2 terms in order for everybody to have a piece of the pie. And when we look at democracy, we look at the prophylactic of it. Now we're going to look at the tunnel of democracy. The tunnel of democracy, where politicians use this tunnel as a voting tool for an avenue to get to a seat that is very powerful, a seat that brings forth incomes. Why else would a politician spend $130 million for a job that only pays $400,000 a year? The tunnel of democracy. Once you go into this tunnel and you get that seat, democracy has put you in a position of power, in a position to control and to even control currency. Let's look at democracy and this tunnel of democracy and how this tunnel of democracy brings forth and begets violence. It is a very threatening situation. Let's look at the elections of 1800, the election of 1804, and the election of 1824 and 1828. 200 years ago, we are closing in now on 200 years ago when one of the worst elections from the tunnel of democracy occurred in our lifetime. And I am going to bring it out today. I'm going to illuminate it today, the tunnel of democracy and all of the nefarious acts that comes with it. This is a Christian nation. The Bible says if you offend the law in one point, you're guilty of it all. Let's just look at democracy right now. What is democracy? Let's look at what the former president, Barack Obama, had to say about democracy.
It can be frustrating, this business of democracy. Trust me, I know. Hillary knows too.
And I know too. It is a business. You heard what the former president said. Let's just listen in on the other forms of democracy I want to go over right now is the electoral. Remember last week we talked about how important it was for the wall to be built, how important it is to control the border. And we talked about the census count and how slavery was brought about and how black people was determined as 3/5 of a man when actually we are a whole man. We are very human, but democracy and the 3/5 is what freed us and emancipated black people. Now let's watch what the former president Bill Clinton had to say about immigrants and how important the census count is and what they really care about. It's not your vote they care about, but it is the electoral. Let's listen in on the president.
But look at the effort here to disenfranchise voters, to make it harder for young people, for people of color, for the elderly and infirm, who are poor and vulnerable, for all kinds of people to vote. Just the reason there's no immigration reform is because the people who are against it are afraid it would adversely affect their electoral prospects. If more people who work and pay taxes could also vote.
If more people pay taxes, they get electoral votes. The wall is so important because the wall will stop everybody as a Democrat. Of course, the Democrats have a horrible history with black people, as we talked about last week. But let's get into some of these elections where the tunnel of democracy was used and how when people did not make it through that tunnel, they became very violent. In 1800, there was Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr battling for an office. Now you have to remember the political parties back then. The Democratic Republican Party was one party. They was very powerful. George Washington and the Federalists were another party. The Democratic Republican Party ran the Federalists right out of the nation's atmosphere or hemisphere. They ran them out. There was no longer more. The Democratic Republican Party became so strong that they had candidates pitted against each other. In 1804, Aaron Burr ran for president and was in a tie with Thomas Jefferson. This is the first time in history that the tunnel of democracy was decided by the House in a contingent vote. And the House gave the presidential election to Thomas Jefferson, and this sparked a lot of animosity. It was so bad that the actions became nefarious by every political person that was in office and in this dispensation of time. Democracy, the tunnel democracy, is going to bring violence because everyone is going to claim that the election was false. So Aaron Burr lost to Thomas Jefferson because the House had to decide it despite the electoral and despite the popular votes. Aaron Burr was frustrated. And then the next year, Aaron Burr didn't even become vice president because a man by the name of George Clinton, not from the Parliament Funkadelics, but George Clinton became vice president to Thomas Jefferson because the 12th Amendment was amended or was ratified so that the Electoral College had to cast two separate votes. So Aaron Burr was kicked out. Now watch how powerful this is. In 1804, Aaron Burr ran for governor of New York. And in 1804, the founding father, Alexander Hamilton, opposed his run for governor of New York. And this upset Aaron Burr so bad because the tunnel of democracy was blocked by a founding father. Now, I'm going to get back into this later, the founding father, but let's just listen in one more time to what our president, our former president, who would be the president today if it wasn't for the 22nd Amendment, because we illustrated that with this man right here, the GOAT, Franklin D. Roosevelt. He is the muse. He is the tool that brought forth the 22nd Amendment. Now you can only run for 2 terms because everybody wants to get down this tunnel of democracy. Pay attention and listen. This is a Christian nation, and the Bible says that if you offend the law in one point, you're guilty of it all. Let's move on right now, and let's see why Franklin D. Roosevelt was so important, and let's see why the tunnel of democracy is so violent. Aaron Burr was so upset with Alexander Hamilton that we'll get to this in the psychology of government later on. But in 1824, in 2024, Trump is going to run for president again. And it's going to mark 200 years since the worst presidential election in American history. Now, as I said last week, I don't want you to think that I make things up, but I want you to understand that I read books. And I'm going to do this one more time because I'm not advertising for free for nobody. But this is a great book to read. It's called The American History. It's an encyclopedia of American history. And you can reference this for some of the things that I say. I'm not going to keep advertising for free. But right now, we're going to just deal with 1824 real fast. And the election of 1824 between Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams. Andrew Jackson lost the election in 1824 to John Quincy Adams, who you know his father was president as well. I believe the second president, John Adams. John Quincy Adams won the 1824 election despite Andrew Jackson winning the popular vote. And that sparked animosity. So much animosity that the party split in two. And the Democratic Republican Party became the party now known as the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats followed Andrew Jackson and the Republicans followed John Quincy Adams. So Andrew Jackson is the father of the Democrats, we could say that. But now I have to move on to our other portion of the show, slavery, Black history. But first, let's just look at what the former President Obama had to say about democracy.
Democracy works, America, but we gotta want it. Not just during an election year, but all the days in between.
All the days in between. So all the midterm elections, what Obama was saying right here, you have to get out and you have to vote in them as well. You just can't vote every 4 years, Black people, for the president, because you don't vote for a president. You vote for an electoral college, which places the president through the tunnel of democracy into that seat of power. Now let's talk about slavery and Black history real fast, because this is going to be the first time that you may ever hear a slavery and Black history lesson on a white man. That's right, I said a white man, and I'm talking about the white man is John Brown. And we all know John Brown. Not the John Brown that we know for these crazy dances in the end zone. Not this John Brown right here. No. But the John Brown we're talking about is this John Brown right here. The John Brown who swore before God in the presence of witnesses that from this time I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery. This John Brown. This John Brown was born in 1800. So you have to understand the dispensation of time in order to understand what the politicians and the people that surrounded by these politicians, what their mindset was. In 1800, John Brown was born. In 1805, John Brown moved to a place in Ohio called Hudson, Ohio, where the man that founded Ohio, this city in Ohio, was named David Hudson. John Brown's father was good friends with these people. John Brown's father opened up a store, and believe it or not, these people are closely connected to politicians. These people were wealthy. These people, John Brown was a landowner. John Brown was a businessman. John Brown knew Andrew Jackson personally. John Brown opened up post offices. John Brown was very instrumental in society, but John Brown had something burning inside of him. John Brown had something burning inside of him that made him make this statement right here before God in the presence of these witnesses. From this time, I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery. It was something going on so bad, and the tunnel of democracy was responsible for it, and John Brown knew it. We look at this thing called democracy, we look at this thing called slavery, and we look at this thing called Black history and the history of our country, and it is horrible. The things are so horrendous that they took slaves through. John Brown couldn't take it. John Brown said it has to stop now. So John Brown's father had a business in Ohio. And guess who worked for John Brown's father? A man that worked for John Brown's father was a man by the name of Jesse Grant. His son was Ulysses S. Grant, who became president of the United States. This was a close-knit society, ladies and gentlemen. You have to understand that democracy was formed by American revolutionists, militia groups, Andrew Jackson being the head of it. So John Brown fought at Harper for the liberation of black people, and John Brown's downfall came at Harper Ferry, where John Brown took over this place. And John Brown was captured and charged with the crime of treason. You have to understand treason. Let's look at this code, the 18 USC code section 2381, treason, what John Brown was found guilty of for him trying to liberate slaves and bring slaves out of torture, out of torment. This is what John Brown was looking at. This is what is going on today in our times when we look at what's going on in the last election. It is going to get even worse in the 2024 election if Joe Biden and Donald Trump match up against each other. But let's look at this law real fast. 18 USC 2381. Whoever owns allegiance to the United States, that means if you're a citizen like John Brown, levies war against them, or, this is the key, ladies and gentlemen, this is the key, America, or adheres to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort within the United States or elsewhere, is guilty of treason and shall suffer death, or shall be in prison not less than 5 years and fined under this title, but not less than $10,000. But the point is here. John Brown was found guilty of treason. And you see right there in that code, you see right here in this code that it says the second part of treason is if you adhere to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. Adhere to your enemy. So when John Brown assisted the slaves in escaping torture and torment, being sold, John Brown was found guilty for helping slaves who was considered America's enemies by the Democrats. Andrew Jackson was pro-slavery. Andrew Jackson right now should be taken off the $20 bill and Harriet Tubman should be placed on it immediately. Andrew Jackson was pro-slavery, a man from Tennessee. Andrew Jackson was known for dueling. Dueling is a sport they had back then where you call somebody out to murder them. Andrew Jackson and the Democrats convicted John Brown. And watch this, this is very interesting. Because this year, the statue of Robert Lee was brought down. Now watch this. Guess who went to arrest John Brown at Harper's Ferry? That's right, Robert E. Lee was the one that went to arrest John Brown. So when we look at the insurrection, when we look at this, John Brown fighting for the liberation of slaves and fighting for true democracy. Robert E. Lee and them fighting for the electoral votes and democracy. They both are defending democracy. How can you say that on January 6th that anybody was guilty of the attack on democracy, the country's attack on democracy? When it always says in this law right here that you have to be going against authority. It was the authority that told people to go to the Capitol to defend your right to democracy. So it's one person's word against another person's word. Robert E. Lee arrested John Brown. Robert E. Lee took John Brown in to be hung It was Robert E. Lee. It was one group of people fighting for democracy and another group of people fighting for democracy. My mother taught me when I was young, two wrongs don't make a right. Paul says that he's seen a law in his members that was warring against the law of his mind. Paul said, that which I do, that which I should do, I do not. That which I shouldn't do, I find myself doing. There is a war among my members. There is a war among our members. Oh, wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death? There is a war in the members of democracy. It is not democracy that is at war. It is the members of democracy that is at war. Let's look at the psychology of this. We have to get into it, but we have to reference slavery and the history lesson today, because it was a white man that died for the liberation of black people, John Brown. Black people, John Brown. Not this John Brown with his electrifying dances, but this John Brown with his electrifying spirit that wanted to free black people from being raped, kidnapped, sold, and amputated. John Brown said, I cannot stand around and watch this. Plus, John Brown said that Abraham and Lincoln and them, they talk too much. He got tired of them talking. So was John Brown an enemy? Was he a friend or a foe? He was a friend of black people, but he was a foe to the American government, to the militias. Robert E. Lee, the statue that you just tore down, arrested John Brown for trying to liberate black people. And you already know, America, that we already have said that Robert E. Lee was horrible. Is Andrew Jackson just as bad? Let's look at the psychology here. Let's look at the psychology of our government. I'm just about defeated with our government. I am wore down, and I know that people that vote are just as frustrated. But let's just look at this right now. The tunnel to democracy is so violent, and people will kill for it. That's right, immolate people. Let's look at our founding father here, Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was murdered by ex-vice president. That's right. This man right here, Aaron Burr, he challenged our founding father, Alexander Hamilton, to a duel. Why did he do this? Why did Aaron Burr challenge Alexander Hamilton to a duel? This is the psychology of your government. Aaron Burr, after losing the vice presidency in 1804, he ran for governor of New York. Alexander Hamilton, the man on the left, or your right, Alexander Hamilton. This man here, Aaron Burr, is this man here. Aaron Burr lost the vice presidency in 1804 and ran for governor of New York. In order for him to get the governor's seat, that seat of power, he had to go through the tunnel of democracy. But what was the problem here? His tunnel to that seat was blocked by Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton opposed Aaron Burr during this campaign. So Aaron Burr challenged Alexander Hamilton, our founding father, to a duel. And Aaron Burr shot Alexander Hamilton. And the next day, Alexander Hamilton died. That's how your founding father died, because of democracy, because of this tunnel to this seat of power. This is how violent the people that campaign for these jobs are. They become so violent because they're trying to get down this tunnel of democracy. They become so violent that they will murder somebody for this seat of power. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars campaigning for a job that pays peanuts. James said, if you offend the law at one point, you're guilty of it all. What is the psychology of the government? What is the psychology of democracy? What is democracy? This is what we're going to break down on the WGPS show. I'm sick of this. I'm sick of politicians using the voters to get electorals. We heard what the former President Bill Clinton said. They just don't want you to mess with their electorals. Let's listen to this again.
But look at the effort here to disenfranchise voters, to make it harder for young people, for people of color, for the elderly, infirm, who are poor and vulnerable, for all kinds of people to vote. Just the reason there's no immigration reform is because the people who are against it are afraid it would adversely affect their electoral prospects. If more people who work and pay taxes could also vote.
If more people could work and pay taxes. So if you let people over the border, the Republicans know this. Most people are going to vote Democrat. Andrew Jackson was a Democrat. He was pro-slavery. He would have never freed the slaves. If it wasn't for people like John Brown, not this John Brown. I love him though. If it wasn't for people like John Brown, this John Brown, here before God, in the presence of these witnesses, from this time I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery. This man died by the hands of Andrew Jackson. You got to understand that John Brown lived at this time that the founding fathers was forming the nation. John Brown detested slavery. He hated it. So democracy and the tunnel of democracy is a violent tunnel. David said, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The tunnel of democracy is just as evil as the shadow of death. This is a Christian nation. We have to start uplifting God. Let me just share you with this because my time is up. But your founding father was murdered because of democracy. Alexander Hamilton was murdered by Aaron Burr, who used to be the vice president of the United States. Let me just share this with you. This is a story of truth and falsehood. Truth was dressing up to go to a convention to speak. And he dressed up, he put his suit and his tie on, and he got in his car, and he took off going to the convention to speak. Truth had to pull over and use the bathroom. He walked into this gas station and got the key and went into the bathroom. And when he got into the bathroom, falsehood was in the bathroom. Falsehood hit Truth upside the head, took all his clothes up off of him, stripped him naked. He put his clothes on, and he got in his car and drove off to the convention. Y'all don't hear me. When falsehood pulled up to the convention, he knocked on the door. The hostess opened up the door and said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm Truth. I'm supposed to speak here tonight." The hostess opened up the door and let him in and slammed the door. Boom. 45 minutes, another knock on the door. The hostess opened up the door. He said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm Truth. I'm supposed to speak here tonight. The hostess, boom, slammed the door in his face. The moral of the story is, America, people will rather hear a dressed up lie than the naked truth. Democracy is a violent tool to a tunnel to a seat that brings forth power. And the people are still not getting what they want out of the people that they're voting in. Abortion is on the table right now. Abortion is on the table, and the people have no power in it at all. It is definitely a violation of our constitutional right not to have power over our body, not only with abortions, but with urine tests when you apply for a job. It is a violation of your constitutional right to privacy. I am Pyson Gion Jackson, and this is the WGPS show. I hope you enjoyed the show this evening. And as always, this is going to be our new mantra. Put the guns down and put your hands up and praise God. And until next week, study democracy and stay strong.